The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
This is what democracy looks like. Show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. Show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. Not one more. 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 Not one more.
Those are the voices of students who protested yesterday on Capitol Hill in front of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's Senate office. And they are a collection of college and high school students who were arrested. The audio that you're listening to is from a video taken by Alejandro Alvarez on Twitter at Ale Tweets News, ALE Tweets News. He was there capturing it as they were protesting, and as they were all those that remained after the warnings, they were arrested. Now, these students are standing, of course, in solidarity with the students from Parkland, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, the Never Again movement, the hashtag March for Our Lives movement, the march that's going to take place March 24th all around the country. And these are students from the D.C. area who put their bodies on the line to stand in solidarity against gun violence, standing for sensible gun reform, and fighting back against the NRA specifically by name. I absolutely love what these kids not only are standing for, but the boldness and the brashness with which they are standing, calling out the NRA, the most feared and the most despicable political action group, association, whatever you want to call them. I call them terrorists because they use intimidation and fear tactics to get their political agenda across. And these children, these kids, these teenagers are taking them head on by name. Take a listen in.
Hey, ho, ho, the NRA has got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho, the NRA has got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho, the NRA has got to go. Hey, hey.
And again, those students were arrested. Many of them were arrested after the Capitol Police descended onto their location and removed them. I want to play a little bit more directly from Alejandro Alvarez's feed, because he gave a really good explanation of what happens in these types of scenarios for civil disobedience, a process that was set up specifically for protesters who have every intention of being arrested. This is a really good summary of it. Take a listen in to Alejandro Alvarez. And again, on Twitter, you can find him at Ale Tweets News.
Again, these students are sitting in front of Mitch McConnell's office to be arrested intentionally to promote attention to the cause, which is increased gun control. For those not familiar with the way that civil disobedience works in D.C., there's this thing that I think only D.C. has called post and forfeit, which was designed specifically for protesters who are being arrested willingly. And what basically it is that these students that you're seeing arrested right now, they will be taken for processing and they will be fined on the spot $50. And as long as they pay that $50 on the spot, that's it. They're free to go, and there's nothing on their record.
I thought that was a pretty succinct summary of what happens when you protest in situations like this. The Capitol Police come in and they take you out. You are arrested, you're processed, and you're given a $50 fine. And if you can pay that, you're released. But these kids are doing it, and they're leading the way. And I have so much respect for them because this is an opportunity. They have created an opportunity for things to actually be different. A lot of people don't think that anything's going to change, but my God, the conversation alone has changed. And the NRA has had a stranglehold on the national discourse with regard to gun control for my entire life. There has never been a time like we have right now where people can speak out so boldly against an organization that wants the United States to sit back and sit by and accept school shootings as something that is normal. Take a listen in to this father, Fred-Guttenberg, whose daughter, Jamie-Guttenberg, was killed just a few weeks ago at Parkland, at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. The father was right down the hall on yesterday while the students were protesting in the hallway. He was in Senate chambers giving testimony, and this is what he had to say.
Just so everyone fully understands why I'm standing. The These acts of violence happen way too often. And after they happen, unfortunately, the response is always way too comfortable, way too polite, and way too temporary. I have no interest in being polite. I have no interest in being comfortable or making anyone else comfortable when we talk about it. No one should feel comfortable talking about the death of my kid. And I have no interest in being temporary. I know I can speak for myself, but for these kids as well, we're not going anywhere. So this is a debate. This is the time, and we're going to get this done.
I mean, it's so heartbreaking. If you remember, Fred, the very day after his daughter was killed, hearing him speak on that day was so heartbreaking. And I want to play it for you, not for any type of tragedy voyeurism, but so that you could see where Fred is coming from and where he, at the end of this speech a few weeks ago, he said he didn't know what to do and that they were lost. And he has channeled that into what he's doing now. Just take a quick listen in to what he said the day after his daughter was killed.
This makes no sense. This is impossible. My girl, my 14-year-old baby. And for those of you who know my Jamie, she was the life of the party. She was the energy in the room. I sent her to school yesterday. In the morning, sometimes things get so crazy, she runs out behind and she's like, I got to go, Dad, bye. And I don't always get to say, I love you. I don't remember if I said that to Jamie yesterday morning. What is unfathomable is Jamie took a bullet and is dead. I don't know what I do next. My wife is home. We are broken. But I can tell you, don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence. It happened in Parkland.
I have no idea how that father was able, how Fred was able to do that the day afterwards and speak. But he wasn't done. He said that he was lost and he didn't know what to do, but he quickly found his footing in one of the most tragic situations that I don't even want to begin to imagine. In the midst of that, he found his footing and he looked Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, right directly in the eye. And this is what he told him.
Here's the problem. Your comments this week and those of our president have been pathetically weak. You and I are now eye to eye. Look at me and tell me guns were the factor in the hunting of our kids in this school this week. And look at me and tell me you accept it and you will work with us to do something about guns.
If I believed that law would have prevented this from happening, I would support it. But I want to explain to you why it would not.
Senator Rubio, my daughter, running down the hallway at Marjorie Stoneman-Douglas was shot in the back.
Yes, sir.
With an assault weapon. The weapon of choice.
Yes, sir.
Okay? It is too easy to get. It is a weapon of war. The fact that you can't stand with everybody in this building and say that, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Your answer speaks for itself.
Thank you, Mr. Guttenberg.
Now, up until this point, I've been referring to him as Mr. Guttenberg, Fred Guttenberg, but apparently it is Guttenberg, so my apologies. So Fred Guttenberg, this is less than a week after he's buried his daughter, his 14-year-old Jamie, and he's found his footing. He found his footing enough to confront Marco Rubio and call him on the carpet for his complicity. You know, at this point, if you are not speaking out adamantly against assault rifles and the ease with which we can get them in this country and the NRA's unabashed support for the loosest imaginable laws possible, if you're not standing against that, then you're complicit with it. And Mr. Guttenberg found his footing in the midst of a darkest tragedy that I don't even want to consider or imagine. And he has not only taken on alongside with these children, They've not only taken on senators and politicians, they've taken on the NRA directly. And this last clip is really the one I wanted you to hear the most. Listen as he stands and speaks and testifies in front of the Senate and calls out the NRA the exact way that the NRA needs to be called out.
And I'm not sure how many of you are aware of the video that the NRA put out 2 days ago, okay? Because they put a target on all of your backs, okay? The NRA, a lobby that finances campaigns, that forces legislation, put out a video basically saying your time is running out. And here is Dana Lausch in the video talking to legislators who don't support her, members of the media who she called out by name, members of the acting community and sports figures, telling everybody if they don't get behind the NRA, their time is running out. And she had an hourglass. At the end of her talking, she turned it over and she said, your time's up. A few days before this video, she had another video called A Call to Arms. I ask you a question. If this was put out by a terrorist organization, we would be raising the terror threat level in this country. Why are we letting this lobby have anything to do in D.C.? I don't understand it. I apologize.
No, Mr. Guttenberg, there is absolutely no need for you to apologize because you're asking the questions that need to be asked. And I'm so sorry that you have to ask from having the experience of losing your daughter. But this is the ad that he was referring to. The NRA and Dana Lausch, they are terrorists. They use intimidation and fear tactics to scare people into acquiescence.
We've had enough of the lies, the sanctimony, the arrogance, the hatred, the pettiness, the fake news. We are done with your agenda to undermine voters' will and individual liberty in America. So to every line member of the media, to every Hollywood phony, to the role model athletes who use their free speech to alter and undermine what our flag represents, to the politicians who would rather watch America burn than lose 1 ounce of their own personal power, to the late-night hosts who think their opinions are the only opinions that matter, to the Joy-Ann-Reids, the Morning Joes, the Mikas, to those who stain honest reporting with partisanship, to those who bring bias and propaganda to CNN, the Washington Post, and the New York Times, your time is running out. The clock starts now.
And as intimidating as they want to make that, as foreboding as it is, it's actually tamed in comparison to the second video that Fred Guttenberg referenced, which was the clenched fist of truth. I have to remind you of it. Listen.
The only way we stop this, the only way we save our country and our freedom is to fight this violence of lies with the clenched fist of truth. I'm the National Rifle Association of America, and I'm freedom's safest place.
I'm sorry, but this organization has to be stopped. They are violent. They use intimidation. They try to make politicians afraid of doing anything except what they want. And this is a quintessential definition of terrorism. Can you imagine? Let's put it like this. The NRA has no need of actually using violence because they're getting everything that they want through the threat of violence, through the threat of political retribution and intimidation. This is what the NRA has become. And there's really no other way to describe them except a terrorist organization that must be stopped, that should not be operating in the United States of America in the manner in which they are currently operating. They have no respect whatsoever. They have no concern for the time they have. They are an absolutist organization that is willing to look at dead bodies of teenagers and children, small children, and scoff because nobody is strong enough to actually stop them. Or at least so they thought. But before I go to the next part, can you still imagine if the NRA did not have what they wanted? They don't have to use violence today because they're getting everything they want through intimidation. That's still terrorism. But can you imagine for one moment if they did not have their way? Look at these ads that they're putting out. They're inciting violence from their participants, from their members. They are inciting violence. You cannot feed this type of evil, hate-filled, bitter, cantankerous, violent rhetoric and not expect some type of backlash or some type of reaction from the people who believe in you the most. And they do this in the face of all of the families who are hurting and broken. They are sociopaths with a lack of they're completely devoid of any empathy for anything other than their agenda. They feel more compassion for an assault rifle that hasn't been sold than they have for the children who were killed. And they think that they are omnipotent. They think that they are all powerful and they cannot be stopped. And they would be wrong. Here is the response video from the students of Marjory Stoneman Douglas to Dana Lausch and her hate-filled propaganda commercial saying their time is up. Listen.
We've had enough of the lies, the sanctimony, the ignorance, the hatred, the pettiness, the NRA. We are done with your agenda to undermine the safety of our nation's youth and the individual voices of the American people. So to every government official unwilling to take action and make change, to everyone with an A+ rating from the National Rifle Association, to every spokeswoman with an hourglass who uses their free speech to alter and undermine what our flag represents, to the politicians who would rather watch America's youth die than get assault rifles off of shelves, to the manipulating lobbyists who think their political stances should be the only ones supported by legislation, to those who refuse to accept common sense gun safety as a bipartisan issue, to those who call high school students paid crisis actors and refuse to listen. Your time is running out. The clock starts now.
A round of applause. The voice that you heard was Sarah Chadwick on Twitter at @SarahChad_. The NRA has met their match, and their match aren't even millennials. They're Generation Z, a whole new breed of young people who grew up in a digital age, in a social media age, with the skill set of any adult. Can you imagine if those kids actually put some funding behind that? They spent $0 on it. They committed their time. But these kids are taking over the world. And you know what? Good on them. Because somebody had to do it. Somebody. March 24th. Be there. Wherever you are in this country, there should be a march somewhere near you. Be there. The March for Our Lives. I'll be covering the Atlanta march. I'll be streaming it live and participating however I can, promoting it every day, because all we have to do is get behind these kids and not allow this story to get old, and not allow it ourselves to get tired of hearing these stories. And yes, these kids have privilege. They've recognized their privilege, but you know what they're doing with that privilege? They are using it to change the world for the better. Have you ever seen a time, for those who are skeptical, answer me this: have you ever seen a time in your life where the NRA was backpedaling and on the defensive? The only way we're going to get a modicum of sensibility in our gun laws is if we take the NRA head on. And these kids, they've done it, they're doing it, and all we have to do is support it. And now it's time for, here's another example of how Democrats suck, headline news. Vox.com has a pretty good explainer on how bad the bill that 16 Democrats voted for yesterday that passed the Senate really is. The article by Emily Stewart, I love the subtitle, instead of acting on immigration or guns, the Senate is about to vote on bank regulation, or deregulation, to be more precise. The bill changes what size bank regulators scrutinize. And according to the article, quote, the dodd-frank bill, which was passed in 2010 in response to the financial crisis, aimed to decrease various risks across the financial system and increase regulatory oversight to prevent such a meltdown from happening again. Republicans have wanted to unravel Dodd-Frank essentially since it became law, and President Donald Trump voted to, quote, do a big number on it soon after taking office. At the core of the Crapo bill, the bill that was passed on yesterday, is the assumption that the dodd-frank financial overhaul was overly aggressive and harmed smaller banks in attempting to rein in larger financial institutions that caused the 2008 financial crisis. This is the article. This is the paragraph right here. The provision of the bill that has garnered the most attention is the one that would raise the threshold at which banks are subject to certain federal oversight, including stress tests that measure a bank's ability to withstand an economic downturn. Under current law, banks with assets of $50 billion or more are considered systemically important financial institutions and therefore subject to stricter oversight from the Federal Reserve. The new bill would increase the SIFI, the SIFI threshold, to $250 billion. Banks with assets of less than $100 billion would be freed of current oversight requirements, and those between $100 and $250 billion would no longer be subject to tougher rules after 18 months. So the bill passed yesterday with the help of 16 Democrats. 16 Democrats who saw this bill and said, you know what, let's give Republicans a win on this one. And more importantly than just giving Republicans a quote unquote bipartisan win, let's forward the idea that smaller banks or mid-sized banks aren't a factor in are not a serious enough factor in financial crises that we should continue to stress test them and to treat them with the same rigorous oversight that we did as a result of the Dodd-Frank. In other words, medium banks aren't really the problem. Let's just look at the bigger banks, the big institutions. And I like what Ezra Klein said, even though he works my nerves, he actually analyzes pretty well. He said, if a few mid-sized in Vox.com, he said, if a few mid-sized banks fail, it's a big-sized problem. In loosening stabilizing regulations on banks with up to $250 billion in assets, the legislation dismisses the lessons of past crises. We know that banks often make the same mistakes at the same time. That's the story of not just the recent mortgage crisis, but of the savings and loan crisis in the 1980s. And 3 or 4 trouble banks in the 200 billion range and add up together to a Lehman Brothers level failure. In other words, if you have 5 banks that make the same mistake at the same time, they can give you a Bank of America sized crisis. But the Democrats on yesterday, the 16 of them, said that, oh, no big deal. And here are some of the Democrats who voted for this. Michael Bennet, Senator from Colorado, Tom Carper, Senator from Delaware, Chris Coons, Junior Senator from Delaware, Joe Donnelly, Maggie Hassan, Heidi Heitkamp, Doug Jones, the newly elected senator from Alabama, who said that he would, have to think about whether or not he'd vote with Republicans. Well, he's finally found something he would vote with Republicans on. It only took him a few months to find that, right? Then you have Tim Kaine, that vice presidential candidate who ran with Hillary Clinton, Angus King, Joe Manchin. Of course, Joe Manchin voted for this. Claire McCaskill of Missouri, Bill Nelson from Florida, Gary Peters, Jean Shaheen, Debbie Stabenow, John Tester, and Mark Warner, all Democrats who voted for this legislation. And this is what Senator Elizabeth Warren had to say about what this bill is going to do for us or to us.
Section 101 of this bill is not reasonable. It takes the CFPB rule and it stretches it in all directions, tearing open big, dangerous loopholes. This bill that's on the floor says banks have some fun out there. It says bring back the greatest hits of the financial crisis, housing scams, scoop up profits on the front end, and leave families holding the bag on the back end. I understand breaks for banks that make straightforward loans, but these loans in this bill are too risky.
And you can count on Elizabeth Warren having her compass being on point on financial issues. You can count on that. But I'm surprised that you have so much from outlets like Vox, They have a really strong condemnation of what Democrats did on yesterday. And I'm quite frankly shocked. I'm shocked that they would call out the Democrats because we've been trying to tell them that for some time, haven't we? And then also, too, I'm shocked at Joy-Ann-Reid. This is what she had to say on Twitter yesterday. She said, from MSNBC, she said, quote, "I'm with Senator Warren on this. What on earth is possessing these red state Democrats to join Republicans in rolling back Wall Street regulations to let banks reopen the casinos that crashed the economy in 2007 and 2008? Well, I just want to remind you guys, I have to read this from behind an incognito window because she blocked me because I called her out about this during the primaries, but she's seen the light. Joy-Ann-Reid went on, I'm so petty. Joy-Ann-Reid went on to say, quote, I have yet to hear a good explanation for why this isn't absolutely terrible and suicidal politically. The Democrats have to distinguish themselves from Republicans. This is no way to do that. And what's up, Tim-Kaine? What gives? Well, I mean, I don't want to be an I told you so, but these are the things that we told you, right? I know that's just another way of saying I told you so. But these are the things that we told you guys during the primaries, that the Democrats, when it comes to financial regulation, they are just as willing to give the banks what they want as Republicans are. And no, it wasn't all the Democrats, but it was just enough to give Republicans a veto-proof majority. So what good is it? I mean, where are you, Chuck Schumer, besides being at the AIPAC conference yesterday peddling some very anti-Palestinian rhetoric? Where were you when everyone needed the Democrats to be whipped into shape, right? Because that's the job of a party leader. You are the Senate minority leader. Your job should have been, instead of going out there peddling anti-Palestinian rhetoric at AIPAC, your job should have been to be there and whip your Democrats into shape. Whip that junior senator from Alabama, Doug Jones, into shape. No, they don't vote for this legislation, not only because of politics and partisan politics, but also because it's just bad for the economy and it's bad for the average American, and it's going to lead to another recession. But most of you probably won't even be alive or at least in office when that happens. Or maybe you will. Maybe it's coming quicker than we think. I don't want to underestimate the stupidity of our banking industry, or at least their, if you don't want to call them stupid, then their incessant drive for profits at the risk of the entire economy. But to the commentators, Vox and Joy-Ann-Reid, like, this is what we've been saying. And this is part and parcel of this Democratic ideology that's pro-business, that's pro-banking. And if we don't address it for what it is, see, you all want to address it with gloves on. You want to address it with outrage after the fact. When we progressives were in there head first, headlong, unscripted, unrefined, just roughnecking it, letting you know that the problem is that we can't tell the difference between too many Democrats. And that right now we see it's just enough Democrats to make sure that something like this passes. And if we don't call it out for what it is right now, going into these primaries, for those that are being reelected, I think out of the 18, maybe about 6 are up for election in 2018. If we don't call it out for what it is right now, they're going to keep doing the same thing. And we're going to stay in a vicious cycle of a Democratic president coming in and relatively fixing up and patching up an economy, but then turning around and then Democrats voting in favor of something that's going to undermine the economy later on. Sure, it's being led by Republicans. Yes, there's a difference between Democrats and Republicans, but on this issue, there isn't. And on this issue, they have enough Democrats that are going to walk lockstep with Republicans right down the bank deregulation alley. And you know why? It's because all the lobbyists who are coming into their offices and pouring money into their campaigns, just like the NRA, except they don't have to use violence. All they have to do is, promise them a job, a lobbying job after they're done, promising their staff lobbying jobs. Some actual elected officials take those jobs as well. Money in politics. And at this point, whenever I feel like I'm starting to sound cliche, I end the show, because we've said all this before. We've been through this time and time again. This was literally the fault line that we fought. The entire Bernie versus Hillary wars could be boiled down to this more than anything else, was the fact that too many Democrats were indistinguishable from Republicans. And now I just feel like a broken record repeating the same thing over and over again. Well, I will say this, since I feel like I'm repeating myself, let me repeat myself. We told you so. And here it is. The proof is in the pudding. And yet somehow we're supposed to galvanize our energy enough to say, hey, vote for a Democrat no matter who in 2018. And don't get me wrong, it is almost bad enough with Donald Trump and the Republican Party, particularly with who they're nominating to the Supreme Court and the other legislation that they're passing. It is almost bad enough to just vote for a Democrat no matter who. However, if we continue to allow these Democrats to do this and not challenge them in a substantive fashion, and the media outlets like Vox and their voices individually on Twitter, Joy-Ann-Reid, they have been a shield buffering these type of Democrats from criticisms. They have been their firewall, and they are now coming to the realization that we were trying to tell them a long time ago. No, get out of the way and let the real people come to the table so that we can help the people to see that not only do we deserve and need leaders who are socially liberal and socially progressive, but we absolutely need leaders that are economically progressive, that will not walk in lockstep with the Republican Party when it counts the most. And we need media voices like Joy-Ann-Reid to get out of the way, because she, along with so many other people, were the ones who stopped us from criticizing, or at least they tried to stop us from pointing out the fact that we could not trust politicians like Tim-Kaine. And now they're just now coming to the realization after the fact, when it's too late and this legislation has passed. And you know Donald Trump is going to sign it as soon as the House gets their version done. I'm done with it because I'm tired of repeating myself. But this is why we need media platforms for progressive voices. And this is why I need you to go to patreon.com/the BPD show and become a patron today. And I will see you tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.